So I just finished recording this video, and I feel like I need to go back to the beginning and put in some extra comments. This video, aside from being very long, gets into some rather depressing topics. So I totally understand if nobody wants to listen to any of that stuff. So I needed to give you a bit of a warning. If you don't want to listen to it, I don't blame you. A funny thing happened when I logged onto YouTube Studio recently. It informed me that I had reached the 15-year anniversary of starting this YouTube channel. And that was actually something of a shock. 15 years? How did that sneak up on me? Especially considering I saw the 10-year anniversary coming a mile away. But 15 years is a long time to stick with something that I've obviously not had any real success with. If you look at my subscriber numbers, notice that I have a little over 1,000 subscribers. And over 15 years, well, that's not a very good ratio. So it's obvious that I am not, never have been, and never will be a success on this platform. But, that never really was the point. Now, it does seem like a bit of a waste that I let the 15-year anniversary go without doing something at least to acknowledge it. So, well, here I am, talking off the cuff about whatever. Normally, with a channel that had been around for that long, might do something special for this occasion, like an Ask Me Anything or something like that. But unfortunately, the 1,000 or so subscribers I have actually only produces maybe like 5 or 6 regular viewers, the people that I would actually consider something of fans. So posting something asking people to come forward with questions will only produce a small number. And plus I didn't think of that in enough time in advance, so it wasn't going to work out. So I decided what I'd do is just sort of talk a little bit about this channel, the reasons why I started it, and the reasons why I'm not a particularly frequent uploader. So originally I started this channel because I had seen other people do it. So what had happened was I had a thought back in 2010, March of 2010, about older games that had like a reputation for being like really good looking graphics. So in 2010, you're say removed by 10 years from the launch of the PlayStation 2. And so, like, at the time, like, a lot of the games you think of as being good-looking games were PlayStation 1 games or some PC games like Half-Life 1, that kind of thing. So, you'd think, like, oh, well, Half-Life was an amazing-looking game, Unreal was an amazing-looking game, like Final Fantasy games were amazing-looking games, but how many of them actually looked that good? And how much of it was just sort of rose-colored glasses, looking back through your mind's eye to the years past and thinking, that game was good at the time, but doesn't really hold up in the modern day. And the one example I came up with was Final Fantasy VII. Now I'm talking the original PS1 game, not the remake series looking at right now. And I thought, well, the characters had the weird block hands and the oversized heads, but there were the pre-rendered cinematics. And I thought specifically about the CG scene where one of the weapons crashes into Junon and then gets its head blown off. And I wanted to go back and look at that cinematic again to sort of get a more modern view or perspective of it. Was it actually good looking, or was it just we weren't used to anything good at the time? So I, instead of playing the game again and finding the scene, which would have taken hours, I decided to just go on YouTube because I figured somebody must have uploaded it. And yes, a lot of people did. But the video I found initially wasn't simply a video of the cinematic. It was of somebody doing a commentary on it. Now, I'd always liked commentaries like DVD commentaries because it gave you an insight into what the director or actors or whatever was thinking or doing, or like some behind-the-scenes view of the movie. And some of the games that I had played had those kinds of things in it, like Valve did it for scenes in Half-Life 2. And Metal Gear Solid 4 had little podcast things where the developers were talking about it that was integrated into the game. But it wasn't particularly common in video games. This, however, was different because it wasn't a developer talking about it. It was some American guy who had nothing to do with the game. He was just a fan who was playing the game. And I'm thinking, why the hell would anybody want to watch this? This doesn't provide any insight or knowledge or anything like that. But I continued watching the episode, and I watched the next episode and the one after that. And then I went back to his channel, and I saw he had done this with a bunch of games. I'm like, that's an interesting thing. Doesn't make any sense to me, but I watched it, so there is some appeal to it. And then I realized something. That there was some missing aspect of gaming culture that I had drifted away from in the previous few years. So I'd been out of high school for a few years by that point, and I realized that there was a huge aspect of even single-player games that was a social experience. And that doesn't just mean that you sit on the floor with a Nintendo controller in hand and your buddy is next to you and you're talking about it, or playing, like trading controller back and forth. But even games that you played while by yourself. When you're in school, you get on the bus and you sit next to your friend, and oftentimes you ended up playing the same game. Like the new Final Fantasy came out. What do? You're talking about the new game you played. Like, oh, Resident Evil 2 just came out. Oh man, did you see the giant alligator? That kind of shit. And that was something that I had lost. So when you graduate high school, a lot of your life changes. You don't have the same social circle. You maintain contact with some of your old friends. You don't maintain contact with some of them. You don't see them particularly often. A lot of the people you interact with when you go into the working world are not going to be your age, unlike when you're in school, because people get clustered by age. So a lot of these people aren't going to have the same interests that you have. A lot of them aren't going to be playing games. A lot of them, if they are, they're not going to be playing the same stuff as you, because you're sort of forced to make work friends with people who may have massively diverging interests from you. Unlike school, where you have a lot of people around you who are the same age, and there's a good possibility that you have more in common with them. So, to get to the point a little bit quicker here, you sort of lose that social aspect of the single-player games because there's just nobody to talk to about them anymore. And as your old friendships dissolve, people move away, don't have time to talk, get married, have kids, die, whatever, you're just sort of losing that social aspect. And by 2010, that was pretty much gone for me. So I missed it without realizing that it was gone. I didn't have that social aspect that I could just play through the latest Resident Evil or Final Fantasy or whatever and then have somebody to talk to about it. And I realized that these YouTube commentary things were some form of a surrogate for that. You're not just talking about a game for the sake of making jokes, which is actually sort of what the guy I was watching was doing. He was just making a lot of jokes. But you were talking about it and filling that void, so to speak. You were having the experience of talking about it, not necessarily with friends, because you don't know any of the people online, but, you know, it is something similar. So I decided, you know what, I'll give this a try. Now, I had no delusion about it, thinking that I was going to be a success. There are some people who, like, turn this into a career, but I'm certainly not one of them. People managed to get paid. Twitch wasn't really a thing at the time, I don't think. Nobody was getting paid for this, and the guy that I had found to introduce me to the concept, I don't think was getting paid for it. So I thought, like, well, if I do this and it becomes popular, then okay, you know what? I'll have people in the comments to converse with or whatever. And if it doesn't work out, if nobody really wants to watch it, then that's fine, because it wasn't really about gaining a fan base to begin with. So I decided to start, and I picked the game Xenogears or Xenogears or whatever nationality you are would change your pronunciation of that name. Because I picked that game because it was not one that I ever knew anybody else who played. None of my friends played it. It was just this quirky, somewhat obscure JRPG from 1998 that passed most people by. But I loved it. I thought it was one of the best games of that generation. So that was going to be my first game that I played for this YouTube channel. So I signed up for the channel, picked a name that I thought was creative at the time. I ended up disliking it eventually, and then I realized that there was a much more popular YouTuber called Lazy Game Reviews, whose content is vastly superior to mine, by the way, who had signed up for his channel a little bit before I did mine. So yeah, I did not copy him. It was just this weird, coincidence of naming. I've seen a lot of other lazy whatevers in the years since. But anyway, I started making episodes for this, and I can only do 10 minutes at a time because it was at restriction, and then eventually got jumped up to 15 minutes. Now there's like a limitation of like 23 hours or something like that. Whatever, I don't know. But I had to cut episodes down to 10 minutes at the time. So the first, 10 hours of that game I played in rapid succession, produced a number of episodes for, all in a period of like 2 days, 2 or 3 days. And I was uploading them one at a time, I think 3 days a week. I think I was on a schedule of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I would upload them on those days. And eventually I didn't get that far into it before I came to the realization, like, yeah, nobody's watching this. Like, this episode got uploaded 2 weeks ago, has 1 view. And even though I said it wasn't my intention or desire to gather an audience, and my continuation of doing it wasn't going to be predicated on that, this lack of engagement sort of killed my enthusiasm for the idea. So I just sort of stopped, and I stopped for months. And I actually forgot about the YouTube channel completely. And then one day I just logged on to it, and I looked and realized that some of the videos that I'd posted, I guess people looking for guides for the game or whatever, had found it, and some of them had significantly more views than I had thought, and realized that it just sort of sat there and marinated for a while, and some small audience found it. So I realized, you know what, I had all of these episodes I never bothered uploading, so let me just throw a buttload of them all on at once. So I uploaded 20 episodes all in 1 or 2 days. And then I continued on producing more and finished the series out. And then I started making ones for other games and all that. My recording setup had changed significantly, even during that first game, because originally I was playing the game on a PlayStation 2, which was hooked up to the TV I had, and I had split the composite signal between the TV I was playing on and it running into a capture device attached to a computer. It was a PCI capture device and a computer in the next room. No, it was a USB capture device, or whatever. It was a cheap one. And it produced low quality video. And it was actually really cumbersome because it was like I was taking up 2 rooms doing this, and I couldn't record the commentary as I was playing the game, which is something I still can't do in some cases. And it was really awkward, and it took a lot of time. But I also realized that I had a tendency to want to re-record parts of it because I was obsessed with trying to speak clearly. Something I obviously never got much better at. But I remember the second or third episode of the series, I re-recorded the first minute of it 12 times or something absurd like that. And the fact that I was doing a post-gameplay commentary afforded me that opportunity, which drove me freaking nuts because I am a little bit pedantic, and that sort of forced me to do this over and over again. And eventually I switched over playing that game into a live commentary in which I was playing the game on an emulator. And of course the video quality got a lot better because we weren't dealing with a cheap capture device played on a PlayStation 2 over composite video. And it allowed me to do a live commentary, and that maybe didn't produce a better result, but it was a whole lot easier for me. And then I started branching out in other games, usually focusing on more story-focused stuff, because what I decided to do was, instead of like cracking jokes or whatever, I would try to analyze the stories of the games a little bit deeper than a lot of the other YouTube game player people would. Now, of course, it's nothing in comparison to sort of the long-form analysis videos that you see a lot of people do nowadays. And my analysis wasn't terribly deep, because especially when you're playing the game as you're talking about it, it's hard to kind of go that deep into something when you're trying to split your focus on actually playing the game. And if you don't write it in advance, trying to come up with it as you're going is pretty difficult. And then there's the whole like timing issue. An episode may be 20 minutes long. How many talking points do you have while making this episode? You may have 30 minutes, you may have 10 minutes, you may have 5 minutes. Or like cutscenes will happen, which I never liked talking over. So I would shut up while dialogue was being voiced, or even if it was just text on the screen, I wouldn't talk over it, because I thought, well, the viewer is going to want to read this, and if I'm talking over it, it's going to fuck them up. So it made it a lot difficult. They made it pretty difficult in order to try to maintain any sort of like vaguely professional quality, because just I may not have enough, or not have enough to say during the time I've allotted myself, or I may have too much to say, and it's not going to be particularly well thought out because it's not written beforehand. I'm splitting my attention between playing the game and thinking of what to say, so that's one of the reasons why the quality of my stuff is pretty low. And that may also be one of the reasons why I am not particularly popular, because of all these weird difficulties I've had. So I had thought about branching out in some ways to do some of the longer form stuff, but I don't really have the patience for it, or the mentality or temperament or whatever. Maybe I might now. Maybe I should give it another try. But at the time, I was having some difficulties with it. Maybe I'll go into that, what those were, a little bit later. I also tried about a year ago going into sort of more technical analyses of things, because I have a degree in computer science, and that I have somewhat stronger awareness of a lot of the technologies used in these things than most people. And I figured somebody needed to give like an alternative to things like Digital Foundry, which overall is pretty good, but it's pretty clear that none of the people involved in that group really actually have a technical background. They're just sort of like enthusiasts. So some of the stuff that they say is just sort of crazy. Overall, though, what they say is pretty accurate and good, but occasionally they come up with these weird hot takes that just don't make any sense. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? But as it turns out, I am not good at that either, so who am I to judge? Plus, I'm not particularly funny, so trying to put jokes in there was kind of a bad idea. But anyway, what was I talking about before? Okay, not having the temperament to do this kind of stuff. So the problem I have there is like trying to sit down and write out a script and then perform the script and then re-record it to straighten out like bad line reads, and then edit the video and then put forward a good like visual presentation. All that is a pretty good amount of work. It's not impossible for someone like me, but I tend not to have the attention or the patience to do it. And that comes down to the fact that I have some issues with attention deficit disorder, and it has a tendency to sort of screw you up in a lot of ways. I think there's a weird mismatch in public perception of what ADD or ADHD is, because a mismatch between public perception and what it actually is. Because most people, if you ask them, just have this sort of external perception of it as being unruly children that have no discipline, that can't sit down and just pay attention to their schoolwork because like nobody disciplined them properly, or adults that are just making excuses for not paying attention to people. And that is not quite right. Now, I do think ADD or ADHD is sort of overdiagnosed in a lot of people. It's easy because there is actually a functional part of your brain that's not working right with it. But it's not really directly observed in people when they're diagnosed with it. You just sort of look at their symptoms and determine whether they have it or not. So it can be overdiagnosed. It can also be underdiagnosed in some ways if a person has appropriate coping mechanisms. But the perception that it's just undisciplined children or adults that make excuses for things instead of taking control of their lives is a little bit of a misperception. Because there is an aspect of a person's brain that isn't functioning right with this. Because there is a neurochemical imbalance. So most people have the neurochemical dopamine, which gets pumped into their system as part of their reward system. So let's say you have a sink full of dirty dishes and you know you have to clean those dishes. And you have to have your plates, you have to have your forks, you have to have all this kind of stuff. You clean it, you put it away, and there you have all your stuff ready. And that dictates you having a need to do this. Now, nobody actually, unless you're like a weirdo, nobody actually likes doing their dishes. So going and performing this task is just sort of a, well, I guess I gotta go and do that kind of situation. So a normal person will pick up the sponge, they'll grab the Dawn, they'll scrub out the pots and pans and all that kind of crap. And then once they're finished, sorry, I hit the microphone. Once they're finished, they'll go back and they'll step back and they'll look at that finished stack of dishes that they just cleaned, and they'll get a sense of accomplishment there. And that's because the reward system in their brain gave them a positive emotional response by releasing dopamine into their system, and it's part of the sort of incentive that brains give our conscious minds in order to make us do stuff that we don't really want to do. The problem with people with ADHD is that doesn't function properly. So that person who doesn't have a functioning reward system in their head will look at those dishes and go, I don't want to do this, and their brain doesn't give them a positive emotional response for doing it anyway, which creates a lot of difficulty when it comes to following through with tasks. So in my case, when it comes to this YouTube channel, I have a tendency to record a lot of episodes in advance, because playing the game and then talking about it is kind of the reason why I was doing this, and then uploading it onto YouTube and having a potential audience view it was sort of the secondary after task, you know? So recording the game, recording the commentary, which is 98% of the work, and then even like editing it down, which I do a little bit of, and then encoding the video and all that kind of stuff, is just like fills up to like 98% of the work or 99% of the work. And then when it comes to uploading it on YouTube, it's only the 1%. Click drag from folder onto your web browser, give it a name, select a date and time for it to go live. That's practically nothing. But doing that last bit, dragging that file over onto my web browser, is not the want to do part of this task. It's the need to do. And even though it only takes like 30 seconds to do all of this, it doesn't trigger a positive emotional response for me, because I know like almost nobody's going to watch this. Why should I bother? And That's why I have a tendency to not upload things for long periods of time, because that part of my brain that tells me, yeah, just go do this part. Like, do this part and you'll feel good about it when you're done, doesn't function. And that can really screw with lots of things in your life. And I'm not just talking about YouTube videos, something stupid like that. Honestly, if this whole channel disappeared from my life tomorrow, maybe I'll spend like 10 minutes thinking, oh, that's a shame. It's not going to ruin my life. It's not going to ruin my day. There's nothing here. This is not a source of income for me. This is just a hobby that I've maintained for way too long. So, maintaining the channel is very much a secondary thing for me. And I might do the other videos talking about the technology and all that kind of stuff. And that's just because I have some comment that I want to let out into the wild. But just maintaining the channel at a regular clip isn't something that I'm good at, because the part of my brain that tells me just to take that last step that you don't really feel like doing just doesn't work. And it can actually be kind of hell for you if you're trying to manage your life where... I mean, nobody wants to do the stuff that they don't want to do, but if you are robbed of the minor little positive emotional response you get out of doing those things or accomplishing those things, then it can really, like, stall your life out in a lot of ways, and it can definitely screw with you. And it's not just like inattentiveness or unwillingness to do the jobs that you don't feel like doing. It also has tremendous effects on your emotional control, emotional regulation, let's call it that. So that dopamine shortage in your brain isn't just related to things that you don't want to do. It's generally like a low sense of satisfaction or accomplishment in your life in general, which is kind of weird to think about. It's not like clinical depression, although I think there is some comorbidity with that. It's not quite like a clinical depression setup, but it can be manifesting similar, and it may like cause it, or may be related to it in some way. I'm not sure. I'm not a doctor. And so if you don't have that reward center in your brain functioning normally, as you go through the day, you tend to have a kind of slow, like, you feel like you're on cruise control, and the days just pass, I'm not describing this very well. I don't feel like making any cuts during this. I want this just to be the sort of stream of consciousness thing, so bear with me if you happen to still be listening, 28 minutes in, so probably nobody is still listening. So I apologize if you are still there listening to me and my way through this. This kind of neurochemical defect in your brain has a tendency to lead to certain addictions. So somehow, thankfully, I have managed to avoid chemical addictions. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't smoke cigarettes or pot or anything like that. I don't do drugs. So I have in some way managed to avoid chemical addictions, but there are certain other addictions which can, if they provide you that little reward center stimulation, tend to become addictive, because it can oftentimes be the only thing in the world that gives you that low, slow dopamine drip that keeps you going. So in my case, this has manifested on occasion as a video game addiction. Now, for somebody who's running a YouTube channel about video games, you think that would result in me being more productive. But as I said before, playing the games isn't the hard part, it's uploading them, uploading the video. So the past month, I haven't played any of the games that I was playing for this YouTube channel. And what I was doing was I was sitting down and playing the Galactic Civilization series. So if you're not aware of it, it's a turn-based strategy game, or like a 4X strategy game that takes place in space. It's sort of like a influenced strongly by the Sid Meier's Civilization games, where you build up a civilization, you research technology, all that kind of stuff. It's not the most complex in that genre, but I'd say it's more complex than the Civilization games, this proper Civilization games. And it doesn't really provide you much in the way of excitement, but it has this weird little, like, just one more turn mentality is what they call it, where you've been playing it for a while, and you're like, well, let me just move my units around or select this new technology, whatever, then I'll click end turn. And then you do that, and you're like, well, let me just do this one more time. And for a person like me, it gives me that tiny little dopamine feed where I'm compelled to just click one more turn over and over again until I realize multiple hours have passed. And what did I do? I burnt my entire day. Wasted my time. And then I feel depressed about that because I knew I had shit that I really did need to do, and I wasted it on this friggin' game. It's also something that I can't produce videos about because no one wants to watch someone just spend 30 hours on a turn-based strategy map doing one more turn, you know? So I sort of got addicted to that for a while. I uninstalled the game a few days ago because I realized how much of a problem it was becoming. Seriously, I over the past couple of months, I spent something like, I don't even know how many hours I spent. Way too many hours playing this game. There's actually two of them. I spent it playing two different games in the series. And it was just because it gave me that little bit the sense of satisfaction. Not accomplishing anything. I felt terrible because I didn't accomplish anything. But it gives you a little bit of an emotional reward system activation because in a sort of sense it feels like you accomplished something. And I had a similar addiction several years back on World of Warcraft. Fortunately, Blizzard managed to make a lot of bad expansions, so they sort of broke my addiction to that. So I was really in the Legion, for example, and then like Battle for Azeroth, I lost interest, and then Shadowlands. Apparently it's been 3 years since I played that game, and I have no intention of ever going back. It was too much. I got addicted to it. I shouldn't have kept playing it for as long as I did, and now that I'm out, I'm gonna steer clear. But that little grind for gear, like, oh, I gotta go do a Mythic Plus. I gotta get my Mythic Plus 8 in this week because I gotta make sure that I get the gear because I want to see the I score go up by 1. And that gave me just a little bit of a positive emotional reaction that just kept me doing it. So that's why I would get addicted to stuff like that. Fortunately, no chemical addictions, but I did get addicted to things that I really shouldn't have. And this has a negative impact on a lot of aspects of your life because you start neglecting other things. But I wasn't talking about addiction, was I? I was supposed to be talking about emotional regulation. See, I wandered off topic. So a person who doesn't have that properly functioning reward system is susceptible to mood swings, and they're usually triggered by external influence. It's not like being bipolar or having, what's the term? Borderline personality disorder or anything like that. It's because you have a sort of, since your reward system isn't functioning, you have a tendency to operate at a very low dopamine level as your baseline. If something comes along which has a positive effect on you, like you find something that does have that activation of your reward system, then you have a tendency to get latched onto it. Now, I said video games can be addictive. That's true, but anything can really be addictive as long as you show some kind of an interest in it. So let's say you find a new hobby. For a short time, if your brain functions the way mine does, you find a new hobby, you have a tendency to throw yourself into it. Now this can result in you spending a lot of time in it, it can result in you spending a lot of money on it. But as in the case of a lot of hobbies with most people, generally it's not something that's going to maintain your attention for terribly long. You'll wear out the novelty of it and then you'll finish with it. Like let's say like you get into woodworking or carving birds out of logs or some shit like that. Now this feels entertaining to you. You want to do it for most people, but like eventually like you probably get bored with it because it's not something that really suits your interest. It was just a novel thing for you. So you'll do it for a few days. Like, oh, I'll spend like an hour this day and a couple hours the next day or whatever. If you have this disorder, you'll have a tendency to throw yourself into a new hobby. You may spend an enormous amount of money preparing yourself or setting yourself up for that hobby, and then it suddenly drops off. So it seems like you were just obsessed with something and then suddenly not anymore. And that's because this new hobby, while it was novel to you, got your attention, gave you that positive reward response, and since it's maybe the only thing you have going on in your life that gives you that, you get addicted to it. But like any new hobby, there's a good chance that novelty wears off, the dopamine stops, and then you suddenly drop off of it immediately. So it can make you seem like you just don't follow through with committing to things. It can also have like strong impacts on social situations where people tend not to want to be around people like this. So it's perfectly understandable why, if you understand like the way that you react can oftentimes be overly strong or negative or whatever. So let's say you're in a social situation. Let's say you're at work and people start talking about they're going to go to a bar or something like that after work. You don't, you hear about this and that gives you a certain something to look forward to. And that anticipation for something that may be fun gives you that little bit of a dopamine spike. Up from that low baseline, it gives you a little bit, make you feel a little bit happy about this. And then your mind just gets latched onto it. That's what I'm going to do today. Your brain has a subconscious way of latching onto it and saying, that's what's going to make me happy today. And then you find out later that you didn't get invited, or perhaps like everybody just decided they weren't going to go. And as strange as it sounds, that little drop, that little thing there, which most people just shrug off like, oh, all right, can be devastating to you, because that little dopamine feed that was activated by your reward system in your brain just gets shut off and you're left with nothing. And you start to think, let me come up with another example and add it to this. You send a text message to somebody, or they send you a text message, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm having a conversation with this person. You send them a text message back. And then you'll sit there looking at your phone every 2 minutes thinking, oh, no, they didn't text me back yet. Oh, it's been 10 minutes. Why didn't they text me back yet? Your brain is consciously aware that text messaging is an asynchronous form of communication. So a person may not see it. They may have seen it and not thought of a proper response yet. They may not be looking at their phone. The phone could be dead. They could be in the toilet. I mean, who the hell knows? There are lots of reasons why a person doesn't respond back to you within like the next few minutes or even the next few hours. They may not get back to you the next day because they don't see the phone. For a long time, I lived in a place with no cell signal, so I wouldn't get a text message until I was 2 miles from home. There's so many reasons why a person wouldn't respond. But when a person with ADHD doesn't get that response, a rapid response, they tend to think like, oh my God, They're not responding. Why don't they respond? Oh, it's because they hate me. Oh, everybody hates me. Geez, what am I doing with my life? I know it doesn't make any sense, and here's the thing, it doesn't make any sense. But the way a person's brain works that has this disorder, it just screws them up so much, and they can't rationally think about these kinds of things. And it causes them to get upset about things that they shouldn't get upset with. And people eventually get tired of a person behaving that way, so they sort of distance themselves from you. And that was painful, and that can be terribly painful.
I will not let you take me now.
But I'd say it's understandable. So let's take a stronger example. Let's say a guy gets a new girlfriend. So the way that a lot of these relationships will work with a person with ADHD is they will start with this sort of initial attraction period. So this person is new to their life, that you obviously like or love this person, and you have a tendency to make them your world. And that's not really much of an exaggeration. This other person becomes your world, because your brain doesn't have that reward system functioning, and when you found something, in this case someone, that does stimulate that dopamine feed, you become addicted to them to a certain extent. And that can result in you showering that person with a lot of attention and care. This tends to be called love bombing, which in modern day conversation has a rather negative connotation to it, because it's seen as being manipulative or whatever. It's not necessarily. It could just be a person who overly latched on to a person due to a sort of emotional dysregulation. So you become addicted to this new girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever friend, and you show them a lot of attention. And in a lot of cases, that can actually, by the other person, be seen as a positive, because if you show them that much attention, it's like a strong... it not only gives them a lot of attention, which a lot of people have a tendency to feel affirmed by, it also gives the impression that you really do love this person, or they really do love you, because they're showing you so much attention. You've sort of become their world. The real problem with this comes either when the initial newness of this person fades away. And even if you do still love them, it may result in a sudden sense of disconnect from them, because that initial attraction that gave you that strong dopamine feed sort of wears off, and a person returns a little bit back to their baseline. It can seem like they suddenly become detached. And that can make the other person think oh, this person doesn't show me attention like they used to, so he doesn't love me anymore. And this is something that I've been through. Girlfriends have felt that I've suddenly become detached, even though it's just a quirk of the way my brain works. I didn't care about them any less. It's just my brain isn't functioning appropriately. Or in other cases where the relationship doesn't work out, but you still have this overly attached emotional connection to them because they became your world, they break up with you, or they move away or die or something like that. It can be absolutely devastating. And I know people would say oh, well, it's going to be devastating for anyone. And yes, it will be. But it's amplified in these cases. How to describe it? All right, so let's say you have somebody that you care about. You have a number of people that you care about in your life, and they all give you those positive emotional feelings. But let's say one person in particular has the strongest, like your girlfriend or your wife or something like that. Let's say something happens to that relationship. This person dies, moves away, breaks up with you, anything that removes them from your life. Now that is very painful to anybody that isn't some kind of a psychopath. But To a normal person, you still have other sources of happiness, so to speak. Your friends, your family, somebody else can be there for you, potentially anyway, to ease your suffering. But if this other person that left you was your only source of this dopamine feed, it's not like one person left you. It's like everybody left you. And you get that addiction ripped away from you, and you go into this emotional withdrawal, and all you have is the pain and the overly negative emotional reaction, which will just wreck you. And there isn't an easy way out. So when I was a kid, before I had understood this, honestly, I was in my 30s before I started to understand how any of this worked. I had always wondered, how the hell do people function like this? How do people, just go through a breakup or something, and then, oh yeah, sure, they're miserable for a few days, weeks, or a couple of months, but it doesn't just haunt them forever. How do people function like this? It turns out most people don't function like this. It's just people that have my particular disorder, that have just an insanely difficult time dealing with anything like that. And it's not just proper relationships. It can also be minor points of criticism. Or if somebody goes up to you and says oh man, your shoes look ugly. If you take any notice to what they're saying at all, that little insult can feel devastating, because what little functioning reward system you had suddenly shuts off and you're left with nothing. And then you're thinking oh my God, my shoes are bad. God, what am I doing with my life? It can be weird. And I know it's irrational. It absolutely is irrational. But the brain doesn't function in a way to let it be rational. So this was an issue that I've been dealing with my entire life. And more recently, in the past year, I decided that I needed to do something about it. Because things like therapy or whatever, you can have coping mechanisms which sort of correct your behavior, but not necessarily the way your brain functions. Or make it so, a coping mechanism for me, for example, was, let's say one of my workers had made some sort of a mistake, and it created additional work for me, or I had to explain what they did wrong to my superiors or whatever. Something goes wrong. I would tend to have this emotional outburst right away. I may not seem like it, I may not say anything, I may not clench my fists, I may not grit my teeth or something like that, but my brain will just explode in this intense anger. Now, I'm not a violent person. I wouldn't go and punch anyone, even if this happened. But, it would be this intense feeling, a mixture of anger and despair that would come over me. Now, my coping mechanism for this is to just stop. Don't do anything. Don't approach the employee. Don't say anything to them. Just take a breath and wait 30 seconds. Because it's a very real possibility that initial anger will fade away quickly. And that's an important thing for me, is I had to just don't take action when you're at your worst. And that's a coping mechanism. And it doesn't stop me from having this strong emotional reaction, which is really the problem, but it does stop me from behaving in a way which is detrimental to myself or the people around me. But it is really just a masking technique. Another masking technique I had when I was in school or when I was in college or whatever, it was doing my homework or reading the chapter I needed to read or whatever. If I'm in a room with other people, they're going to distract me. If the TV is on, they're going to distract me. If I can see stuff going on around me, it will distract me. So what I would do is I would wait till it was nighttime, so I couldn't see anything out the window. I'd go into a room by myself, close the door, put headphones on, and listen to music that I didn't like. So that way I couldn't see what was going on around me. I wouldn't be distracted by noise like footsteps in the next room or a dog barking outside or whatever. And I wouldn't like sing the song in my head because it was a song that I disliked. Like if I were listening to like Katy Perry or something that I didn't want to listen to. I'm not going to sit there and sing Katy Perry lyrics in my head, even if I'm listening to this nothing but Katy Perry. So it was sort of like an isolation technique, because music I don't like is sort of like white noise. More recently, I've taken to playing like the sound of rain or something, which is another kind of white noise to me. So it allows me to either focus on my work, or like if this fails, then my imagination goes wild and I just think about something else completely. But it is really just a coping mechanism and allowed me to do things that I needed to do, as opposed to actually being a solution to the problems that were going on in my head. And things really were just getting worse. So even though I had lived with it my entire life, I'd say around 2020 is when it really started to take a strongly negative turn. And not just with my executive functioning or the performance of my job or anything like that. In general, I've always had a pretty good work ethic, even though you wouldn't think it by looking at the output of my YouTube channel or the number of dirty dishes in my sink. When I'm doing my job, I can focus on that because of some weird quirk with the way that deadlines work, actually sort of like stimulate my brain to do my job better, weirdly enough. But the sort of like emotional scene going on behind the curtains kind of was a disaster. Now in 2020, nobody had a good 2020. COVID pandemic, lockdowns, people stuck at home, people getting laid off, or in some cases like myself having to work too much, had a tendency to put a lot of stress on people. But a lot of that crap didn't happen until March or April, when the news of the virus spreading around in the United States and other countries became widespread and lockdowns started. My miserable 2020 started right at the beginning. So in actually New Year's Eve of 2019, my stepdad went into the hospital, and he would die about 22 days later. So he was in the hospital for that time, and he was just getting worse. And he eventually died. And it was just the start of the year. So that set me into I was depressed about that. And as soon as he died, I had a kind of a minor blip on the radar. Just another thing, though, to add to the list of things that were going wrong was my computer had broken. My graphics card had burnt out because I don't know why. But it was fixed by a not that this really matters in the grand scheme of things, just saying it got fixed by warranty. But it meant that my computer didn't work for like 2 or 3, like a month and a half or so, because it had to be sent in the mail. The graphics card had to be sent in the mail. But my computer broke, and before I could really take any action to fix it, I got sick. And I got very sick. Now, at the time I thought I had the flu, but I think it's pretty clear now that I had an early COVID infection. In fact, it's possible that that's what killed my stepdad. But they weren't looking for it at the time, so he didn't get diagnosed with it, and neither did I. But a lot of the symptoms really matched up for both of us. And I had long COVID symptoms for several months that followed. So I had shortness of breath and all that. I was dealing with the fact that my stepdad died. I was going through the RMA procedure with a graphics card company. As COVID had set in, the lockdowns had started, and the company I worked at started to see a lot more business because a lot of other places shut down, but we didn't. And I was under a lot of stress from work. I was still grieving the death of someone. A few other things, and it really started to build up the stress. And as I said before, emotional regulation is something of an issue. So it started to get worse. And, I had a little bit of a reprieve in 21. Even though my job got more stressful, say you meet someone and then, as I said before, new relationships have a tendency to give you a bit of euphoria in the beginning, but it didn't work out. And of course it didn't work out. I wouldn't be talking about it if it worked out. And that sent me into a deeper sense of depression, and it got really bad. Oh God, I've spent 15 years almost never saying anything about myself, and now here I am talking a lot about myself, but we're 55 minutes in, no one's still listening, why the hell not? So, in 2023, I would say, it started to get really bad. And so, God, how to put this? A lot of people go through short bouts of suicidal ideation. It's something that just sort of will creep into your head for a few seconds, what am I doing with my life? I've wasted so much time. Nobody cares, whatever. Why do I even go on, kind of thing. And honestly, I think most people occasionally have those thoughts. So when it started happening to me, I didn't really think about it too much. Just thought, this is just something I'm going through because I'm under a lot of stress and all this. It'll be fine. I'll be all right. Then it started getting worse and started happening more and more frequently. And I would say about a year ago, it hit its maximum level, where instead of happening once every year or once every few months or so, I started to have these thoughts every day. And I figured that I knew this was a problem. And talking about my feelings didn't get me anywhere. And that's when I started really researching into what kind of effect ADHD has on me. And I realized that it wasn't just my mental state not keeping up with my life or where it should be. It was actually a chemical imbalance in my brain. So I started to research how do you fix this? Well, the coping mechanisms, I did those. It doesn't help with my own brain. There's sort of cognitive behavioral therapy, which didn't seem like it would benefit me in this case. But there is a lot of newer medications on the market, unlike the old school Ritalin or anything like that, but newer stuff that really most of them are stimulants, so they stimulate your brain and they give you a sort of a dopamine, it makes your dopamine system function better, perhaps correctly. So I decided okay, this is probably the best route. So I get myself re-diagnosed with ADHD and I get prescribed a medication which I'm unable to find for the first couple of months. So long that my prescription's actually expired because stimulants are a controlled substance in the United States. So you get a prescription for it, and even if it can't be filled, because there was a shortage for a long time in the U.S. and I think Europe and everywhere in the world, really. There was such a shortage that I just couldn't get the medication filled. And that was another stressor that added on. And eventually I was able to get it filled, but only for 1 month, and it was another 3 months before I can get another 30-day supply. But as soon as I started taking it, I noticed an enormous change in myself. Remember the first day I had taken it? I took it, and it took about an hour for it to start working. And I remember once it was working, I looked up into the sky, and I thought, something is different right now. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it just felt like something was different. Now, there's a certain euphoria that comes with taking a stimulant medication. And people say, oh, I just feel good because, I'm stoned. And to some extent, that is true. The stimulant isn't that strong. It's just catered to activating my reward system, but it is still there. And I was thinking, is this because it's making me high, or is this just how normal people feel? And I wasn't really able to answer that question for a long time. And I did notice there was a lot of downsides to taking it, but a lot of it just came down to not really becoming accustomed to taking it. So like I said, I was only able to get a 30-day supply that I needed to have last me for 3 months. So I was taking it, and like when I started running low on pills, I started taking it only selectively. Once every 4 days or something like that, to try to stretch the medication out. And on the days I wasn't able to take it, I was able to notice an enormous difference in the way I felt about everything. Things, when I was taking it, things that would frustrate me or whatever, were just like rolled off my back like it was no big deal. And I realized, shit, I would have been pissed off or heartbroken or whatever about this before. But it's okay now. Like, I don't have to be too pissed off about this. It's fine. And it's weird to realize how your brain was so messed up before that all of these things just presented as enormous problems, and they're just not when your brain is functioning correctly. But because I had such a shortage and I wasn't used to taking the medication, I had 2 problems. One was the days, what I had mentioned before, the days I wasn't able to take it. And the second was the come down that comes after you take the medication. So I take the medication, it lasts 12 hours. So approximately 12 hours. So I'll take it, take the pill, it'll take approximately an hour for it to start working on me. And then after that hour, I am feeling like better for about 12 hours or so after I take the pill, and then I'll notice it wears off. And that come down can be pretty severe, and it would sort of be like the same kind of come down you feel if you have that sort of like standard emotional deregulation, like somebody insults me or something like that. That dopamine is suddenly cut off, and not suddenly, it tapers off, but it'll taper off over a period of like a half an hour. And I remember this one time I was in a store, and there was absolutely nothing happening. But it was 12 hours after I'd taken my medication, and I had thought back to something that had happened in that store about 6 months earlier, when I had run into an old friend of mine, somebody that, like, he and I were, like, very close our entire lives. But about, maybe like 9 years ago, something happened I'm not going to go into, but he had stopped talking to me. And I saw him, and we had talked to each other a little bit in the time since, where we'd reconnect for a couple of days, and then for some reason he would grow distant again. He's got his own issues, and I don't want to slander him or speculate as to, well, I do know what's wrong with him. So I have sympathy for him, because I was somebody who wasn't right in the head for a long time too. And I'm only now getting a handle on it. And if he doesn't have a handle on it, then I can't judge him, you know? But he had seen me before I saw him. And he turned around, and as soon as he saw me, though, he started leaving. And I only saw him as he was going. And at the time, I was a little upset, thinking, like, you couldn't even stop and say hi to me or whatever. But I moved on from that. But 6 months later, when I was having my come down off the medication, that memory popped in my head, and I had a fucking panic attack. And I had to get outside, and I just left. I went outside, and I just stood next to my car. And as soon as I was out there, I felt better. But it was clear that, like, even though I was on the medication, I still had to get used to the changes between, like, the ups and downs that came with it. So those downs had a tendency to be very strong in the first few months, and I had to sort of get used to the ups and downs before, because really did get pretty bad some days. So there was another incident which happened when I had gotten down to the last pill that I had on my initial prescription fill. So I'd gotten 30 days. 3 months later, I was down, or 3-ish months later, I was down to my last pill. And I had taken it to this one day because I knew I was going somewhere and doing something that I needed to have some control over my own emotions. So I took the pill and I went through the stuff I was doing that day and I was fine. But later that night, all the medication had worn off, and all of those negative emotions that I had been put off because my brain was functioning right eventually came back to me. And I realized that, oh man, I would have been absolutely devastated if I wasn't on the meds at the time. But I was, and I didn't have to have this negative response. But now here I am, 13, 14 hours later or something like that. And I was left like with just the raw emotions sitting there. And I fell into this extraordinary depression to a point like that I had never felt before in my life. And I was 20 minutes away from killing myself. And the reason why I was 20 minutes away is because that's how far away I was from the railroad tracks. My plan was to drive out there and run in front of the train. And this was 6 months ago. And honestly, like, it wasn't going to happen. I can look at the situation and say that wasn't going to happen. Because typically a person having suicidal ideation will have it pass if they stop and they think. And that's a suggestion I have for anybody who's going through anything resembling this. Sit and do nothing, because the worst thoughts will pass. And the 20 minutes, honestly, it would have been more than 20 minutes because I'd have to wait for a train, you know. Some point in that time I would have calmed down or rethought it. Chances are unless I sat there and just thought about it, because I could just think about it more, and which is why talking about my feelings didn't help for me, because it just amplified the negative emotions, because it would run over my head and just build and build and build, as opposed to expressing themselves in a healthy way. So I would just get worse if I thought about it. But in the 20 minutes it would have taken me to get out there, I probably would have rethought my situation and not done it. Not to say that this was a healthy place for me to be. I just recognize that mechanically I probably would have gotten through this moment. But I had been feeling worse than I had ever felt in my life. And actually the thing that stopped me was because I sat down to write a suicide note. And I'm a fairly pedantic person. It may not be obvious watching these channels, this YouTube channel, but like if I'm writing something or whatever, I will sit down and I will go over my spelling and punctuation and all that shit over and over and over again. And in a sense, in a situation where you know that this is going to be your last words you have to anybody, you kind of get this weird impression that you want it to be either profound or some way soothing to anybody who may feel like they need to blame themselves for what happened, which is a stupid thought. Like, you're never gonna live up to the ideal that you're trying to fill there. So I spent a long time writing this note, which I actually stumbled upon like a couple of weeks ago because I saved it on my computer, and it gave me like this immediate whiplash, like, God damn, I was that bad. So I sat down and I spent a good long time writing this, and by the time I was finished writing it, the worst of the thoughts had passed, and I didn't do anything, obviously, because I'm here recording this. But it was a realization that I did have a problem, and I needed to find some other outlet that wasn't just complaining about my problems or talking through them or relying on a medication to regulate my mood. A lot of those things could help, but they're all tools in the overall toolbox, So one of the things I did was I'd gone back to writing. Now I had been writing like a long time ago. I had tried writing when I was a kid. It didn't work out. I was bad at it. And then when I was in college, I did a pretty good job. Like I had to take English courses, even though I was in a computer science course. I had to take a number of English courses, and I took creative writing. And the professors I had in these courses thought that I was good, and most people thought that was my major. So I had something of a talent for it, but I didn't have the focus that I needed to really do it right, because the ADHD was fucking me up too much. But getting back to it more recently, when I had the medication to assist me there, allowed me to use it as a sort of emotional expression, to oftentimes sort of like take the pain I was in and put it into words in a certain way. Because a blank page isn't going to judge you, isn't going to tell you you're an idiot or that you shouldn't feel a certain way. So doing this, writing this stuff, also gave me something to do. So I sat down for a month. So like November 4th through December 4th, I set myself up with a writing exercise where I would write as many short stories as I could in that 1 month period. And I ended up writing 7. And 7 short stories. It ended up being somewhere around 36,000 words. So none of them were particularly long, but there was a massive swath of subjects, from just sort of like emotional stories about this or that or whatever, to like survival stories, stuff like that. And when I was done, I realized that, you know what, some of them I thought were actually pretty good, rough as hell because they were all first drafts, but some of them actually seemed like they might have been pretty good. So I thought if I edited them down, maybe I can get them published, and that's something that I've been working on recently. The publishing industry is a fucking nightmare, though, so I wouldn't recommend doing it if you... emotional regulation, people. I'm working on that, though. But anyway, after I wrote them all, I set everything aside for a couple of weeks. And then when I returned to them to edit the stuff, I had noticed a few things. And one of them was, one of the stories in particular was extremely, like, emotionally intense. To read it and to have written it. And it had some resemblance to one of the situations that I had been in that caused me a lot of pain recently. And reading through it again after the fact sort of because it didn't take place from the perspective of the person who was going through what I was going through. It took place from the perspective of somebody else. And it gave me a kind of external view of what I was going through and allowed me to sort of process things from a different viewpoint. And by then, I had a lot of, just sort of by nature of getting used to the way the medication worked on me, I was doing better by this point anyway. But having a method of expressing my emotions in a way that wasn't going to get me a lot of judgment, a lot of negative judgment, or let's face it, people have negative judgments. That wasn't going to get me a lot of negative judgment, and then being able to view it later sort of gave me a stronger foundation in order to sort of base myself with. So I am doing a hell of a lot better now than I was 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I was 20 minutes away from killing myself. Now, I'm not. I'm doing a lot better. Still have my moments where I get frustrated. Still have days where I'm not taking my medication for one reason or another, but I'm not getting anywhere near as bad as I was 6 months ago. And that is an enormous improvement, because I was faced in a situation where I felt like I had no hope. I felt like I had no one to turn to because, quite frankly, I had no one to turn to. And now I'm in a place where I am building healthier relationships with people. I'm trying to rebuild the ones that I ruined because I didn't have a right state of mind and I was putting everybody off. And I'm not, if everything falls apart again, I know I won't fall apart because I'm becoming a stronger person. So if anybody is sitting there thinking like, oh shit, this guy's having a cry for help, I would have had a cry for help 6 months ago. All I'm saying now is that I'm doing better. And there's a lot of, like, I think maybe one of the reasons why emotional expression, like talking about my problems didn't work for me, just comes down to sort of this whole model of, like, the concept of therapy or the way society dictates people should emotionally function is very much centered around the kind of female experience as opposed to the way, like, a guy's brain will work. Now, if you're going to look at things from the perspective of evolutionary psychology, you're going to have differences in the way that men will cope with problems as opposed to the way women will cope with problems. So a guy sort of needs some functional way of dealing with their issues. So for a guy, you will feel like, if not many of the people who watch my channel are women, so I'm not really giving anybody here information that they don't already know. But guys sort of need to take action as opposed to talking about their issues. So either get up and fix your problem, which is something I had a problem with. I couldn't just get up and fix my problems because my brain was so fucked up. Either get up and fix your problems or nobody cares. And that's both a, like, perhaps ingrained into our DNA way, like evolutionary psychology expressing itself in guys, saying that this is how you deal with your problems. And it's also sort of a society thing. So the truth is that not too many people in the world have a lot of sympathy for a guy who is emotionally struggling with things. You sort of get this whole cry me a river, shut the hell up, like you're privileged kind of thing. Lots of people will come up with that kind of stuff as sort of an excuse for, like, hey, stop complaining, shut the hell up. You don't have any problems. And even if they think you do, they'll tell you, well, you just got to deal with your problems. You can't, like, don't complain, fix them, kind of thing. So a lot of the people, so for example, I had a friend who oftentimes had something she would say where she would say something like, when you're at your worst is when you find out who actually cares about you. And for her, like, saying this was kind of a cry for help, trying to get people to, like, pay attention to her, that kind of thing. And I would say to her, yeah, it's good to have somebody who will sit and listen to you and all that kind of stuff. But imagine life from the perspective of you reaching your worst point and then realizing that nobody really cares. And I'm not saying that, like, people don't actually care about you completely, but it's more a sense of a person's perception of your value is determined largely by how useful you are to them. So it could be like either like a financial value that you add to somebody, or in some cases like what good you are to them. You may provide like emotional support to somebody, or you gave a person a place to live, or you make them laugh, or something like that. And that is the basis in which they can be perceived to care about you. But once that purpose that you have disappears, then your value to them does as well. And if they are reliant on you to sort of like be like a strong person to them or whatever, not having that value essentially makes you useless, and they don't feel like they owe anything to you to listen to you or whatever. And perhaps it's true that they don't really owe you anything. But it does come across as sort of mercenary to have this sort of very asymmetrical relationship with a person where you have to be the person who supports them, and if the roles are ever reversed, and oh God, why the hell would they give a shit about you kind of thing. And it's not something that I'd say, like, once again, it's not something that I can really blame anybody for. This is probably very strongly rooted in evolutionary psychology, and especially in a situation where we're talking about, like, how much a woman would care about a guy. In a lot of cases, unless there really is a strong emotional connection there, which there can be a perception of one even if there isn't one because of the sort of asymmetrical needs that I've mentioned earlier. If that initial use just disappears and your initial value to them disappears, and they are in a place where they prove whether they do or don't care about you, that is when you discover whether somebody actually does. And most people don't. At least not to the point where, like, they're willing to sit there and listen to you or give a damn about you if you're struggling with anything. So it sounds like a terrible thing to accept, but honestly, one of the problems I had was I had lost track of this fact. I had lost track of the fact that there weren't many people that actually gave a damn. I was useful to a lot of people in a lot of ways, but if I faltered on that, then their perception of value in me diminished, and suddenly what I perceived to be a sort of symmetrical relationship of people, like, whatever, wasn't. And, that's just the way it is. And I lost track of that fact, and I convinced myself that that wasn't true, and that was one of the things that led to me having more pain over the situation than I actually should have. So that's, I sound like I'm not valuing myself much. Maybe it's because I don't. That's a joke, people. I'm doing a lot better now. All right, so I'm an hour and 22 minutes into this. I've said a lot more than I intended to. I went on a long rant. I'm pretty sure not a single damn person has listened this far. So if you have, just keep in mind, I sound really dire here. And I was in a bad situation for a long time, but I'm not now. So if somebody out there has any worry or concern, it's okay. It's over with. It's over with. I've done better. I'm doing better. I will be doing even better than I am now, because every day, I have occasional moments where I slip up, but every day I'm doing better than the day before. And it is a trend in the right direction. And I am 6 months removed from my worst day. And I plan on never going back.